Chapter 8: Betrayal. Inner conflict. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows across Daniel's face, highlighting the deep lines of worry etched around his eyes. He sat hunched over a worn Bible, his fingers tracing the worn edges of the pages, a stark contrast to the usual boisterous energy he exuded. For days, he'd been withdrawn, his normally jovial spirit replaced by a brooding silence that hung heavy in the air of their makeshift sanctuary, a forgotten cellar beneath a crumbling church. The apocalyptic events unfolding above had already claimed countless lives and tested their faith, but this new threat, this internal fracture, threatened to shatter them from within. Sarah, ever watchful, observed him from across the room. The betrayal had cast a pall over the small group, a chilling reminder that the enemy's reach extended far beyond the shadowy organization hunting them. It had infiltrated their ranks, their haven of faith and shared hope. She remembered the chilling encounter. Daniel, usually so quick with a joke or a comforting word, had been found staring blankly at a coded message delivered by a shadowy figure. The message promised him power, safety, an end to the chaos, everything he'd been desperately yearning for. The fear that had clenched her heart then still tightened its grip now. The prophecy, the cryptic scriptures they had painstakingly deciphered, had prepared them for the physical onslaught of the apocalypse, the relentless pursuit by those seeking to exploit the chaos. But nothing could have truly prepared them for this, the insidious whisper of doubt, the subtle erosion of trust that threatened to dismantle their fragile unity. "He's praying," whispered Elijah, his voice low and hushed, breaking the oppressive silence. Elijah, a former soldier, possessed a quiet strength that had become invaluable in their desperate struggle for survival. His words were a gentle nudge, a reminder that their faith, their communal prayer, was the only weapon against this unseen enemy. Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on Daniel. He was indeed praying, but there was no peace in his posture, no serenity in his whispered words. It was a prayer born of anguish, of desperate conflict raging within his soul. His prayers weren't pleas for guidance or protection. They were pleas for deliverance from an inner torment, a battle fought in the silent chambers of his heart. She recalled the day the message had been delivered. The clandestine messenger, a figure cloaked in darkness, had slipped into their refuge unnoticed, leaving behind a small, sealed scroll bearing an intricate, almost demonic-looking symbol. The symbol echoed the mark she'd seen on the organization's agents, the same mark that had appeared in the ancient prophecy, a symbol associated with the fallen angel mentioned in Revelation. Daniel, drawn by the promise of safety, had opened the scroll, a promise that whispered of power and an end to the suffering. The scroll contained a proposition from the organization, a chance to join their ranks, a chance to wield influence and prevent the rapture, a power that would be irresistible to someone so weary from the unending onslaught of the apocalypse, someone who had lost everything. The conversation had been fraught with tension, fueled by both fear and the desperate need for faith. Daniel's words had been hesitant, almost broken, his usual confidence replaced by a fragile vulnerability. He spoke of the unending suffering, the sheer exhaustion, the seemingly insurmountable challenges they faced. He argued that their efforts to oppose the organization were futile, that they were fighting a losing battle against an unstoppable force. He'd painted a picture of a future where the organization, through their mastery of technology and their alliance with the ancient evil, could bring order, security, and prosperity, an alluring promise in the face of utter devastation. The others, particularly Elijah and Martha, had pleaded with him, reminded him of their shared faith, of their trust in God's plan, despite the chaos. They had spoken of the hope found in Christ's promise of salvation, the redemption that awaited them, the strength found through prayer and mutual support. But Daniel remained unmoved, his eyes clouded with a desperate longing for something more tangible, something more certain than faith. The debate had ended with Daniel retreating into a corner, consumed by his inner turmoil. Now, Sarah watched as he continued to wrestle with his conscience, his prayers punctuated by ragged gasps and choked sobs. She understood his struggle. She had felt the weight of doubt herself, the temptation to abandon hope in the face of overwhelming despair. But unlike Daniel, she had found solace in prayer and in the unwavering faith of her companions. Days bled into nights. Daniel remained isolated, his silence a constant, agonizing reminder of their precarious situation. The group attempted to reach him, to offer comfort and support, but their words seemed to fall on deaf ears. His struggle was more than a spiritual crisis. It was a battle for his very soul. One night, Sarah approached Daniel, her heart heavy with compassion and concern. She sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm, a silent offering of comfort and unwavering support. "Daniel," she began, her voice soft, "we know you're hurting. We've all been through so much, and the weight of everything is crushing. But we need you. We're fighting this battle together." Daniel looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, his face etched with exhaustion and anguish. "It's too much, Sarah," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Too much to bear. There has to be another way, a better way, one that doesn't involve endless suffering and sacrifice." Sarah nodded, understanding the depth of his despair. She knew the allure of the organization's promises, the tempting ease of surrendering to their dark power. She'd witnessed firsthand the destruction the organization was capable of unleashing, and she'd felt the cold grip of fear herself. But she'd found strength in her faith, in the knowledge that God's plan transcended their current suffering. "There is a better way, Daniel," she said softly, meeting his gaze with unwavering conviction. "It's not a way of ease, not a way without pain, but it's a way of hope, of redemption, of eternal life. It's the way of faith." She spoke of the power of prayer, of the unwavering love of God, of the ultimate victory that awaited them. She shared her own struggles, her own moments of doubt, acknowledging the very real human vulnerability that they all shared. She spoke of forgiveness, not just for others, but for themselves. Daniel listened, his body tense, his spirit seemingly torn between two opposing forces. The hours that followed were filled with prayer, with shared tears, with a quiet, heartfelt conversation that exposed their vulnerabilities, the struggles and doubts that lay beneath their outward strength. Slowly, painstakingly, the lines began to soften on Daniel's face. The despair, although still present, was beginning to be replaced by a flicker of hope, a glimmer of renewed faith. The encounter had been a turning point, a stark reminder of the constant battle between good and evil that waged not only outside their sanctuary, but within their hearts. It was a testament to the enduring power of faith, forgiveness, and the strength found in communal prayer. Their faith, though tested, had not been broken. The insidious influence of the organization had been repelled, but only through their unified prayer, their collective faith, and their unwavering commitment to each other. The temptation remained, a constant shadow lingering at the edge of their sanctuary, but their shared faith had created a shield against the darkness. Their journey was far from over, but with Daniel back in their ranks, their hope, renewed, shone brighter than ever before. They would face what lay ahead together, their hearts fortified by the unshakable power of their faith in God's unwavering love and divine plan. Difficult decision. The air in the cellar hung thick with unspoken accusations. The flickering candlelight painted the faces of the small group gathered around Daniel in hues of apprehension and doubt. Their sanctuary, once a haven of shared faith and resilience, now felt claustrophobic, the weight of their decision pressing down on them like a physical burden. Sarah, her usually vibrant eyes clouded with uncertainty, spoke first, her voice barely a whisper. "Daniel, we all saw what happened. We saw the struggle, the temptation, the almost fall." Daniel bowed his head, his hands clasped tightly together. The recent encounter with the insidious organization, a shadowy group preying on the vulnerable in this ravaged world, had left its mark. He had nearly succumbed to their promises of power, their seductive whispers of an easier path through the apocalypse. The memory of that near betrayal still clung to him, a bitter taste on his tongue. He'd fought back, his faith ultimately prevailing, but the scars remained. He looked up at their faces, etched with a mixture of fear and hope. He knew he couldn't erase their doubts with words alone. His actions needed to speak louder than any confession. "I understand your hesitation," he began, his voice raw with honesty. "I almost betrayed everything we stand for, everything we believe in. I know I can't undo what almost happened, but I beg you to understand that the grace of God is greater than my failings. I've repented, I've sought forgiveness, not just from you, but from God himself." Thomas, a stoic man whose faith was as solid as the rock he often quoted scripture on, remained silent, his gaze unwavering. He was a man of few words, but his silence spoke volumes. He was the leader of their small group, their moral compass in this chaotic world, and his judgment held significant weight. His silence was a heavy stone in their hearts. "Thomas, we need your wisdom," said Martha, a woman whose gentle demeanor often masked a sharp mind. "We've faced unimaginable hardship together. We've seen the darkness close in, but we've always found our way back to the light through our faith and through each other. Can we truly trust again?" Thomas finally spoke, his voice gravelly but measured. "Trust is earned, not given freely, especially in these times." Daniel's actions, they shattered that trust. The question isn't simply whether we can trust him again, but whether we should. The consequences of a misplaced trust could be catastrophic. A wave of fear washed over the group. The outside world was a terrifying landscape of destruction, but the threat within their small community was equally perilous. The organization was still out there, its tendrils reaching into the hearts of men, whispering promises of power and security. If Daniel, a man they once considered their steadfast brother in faith, could be tempted, who was truly safe? Their discussion continued late into the night, fueled by flickering candlelight and the ever-present fear that stalked their every moment. They recounted their experiences, sharing their fears and doubts, their hopes and anxieties. Each member shared their own personal struggles, reinforcing their shared vulnerability and the critical need for unwavering faith. David, a young man who had found solace in their sanctuary after losing his family, spoke of his own temptations to despair. He confessed to fleeting thoughts of giving up, surrendering to the hopelessness of their world. Yet, he found strength in their collective prayer. He said, their unity was the anchor that had kept him from drifting away. Elizabeth, a mother of 2 young children, revealed the depths of her despair. She talked about her constant struggle to protect her children in this ruined world, of the ever-present fear for their safety, and how faith had become her only solace. The challenges were relentless, she confessed, but she found renewed strength in her faith and in the companionship and support of their small community. The discussion illuminated their shared struggles, deepening their understanding of each other's vulnerabilities and anxieties. But it also brought to light the cracks in their once unshakable unity. The nearly betrayal by Daniel highlighted the very real danger of internal division and the ever-present temptation to stray from their faith. Their unity was not just a matter of trust, but of survival. As dawn broke, painting the sky in pale hues, the gravity of their decision weighed heavily upon them. They understood that their choice wasn't merely about forgiveness or trust, but about the very survival of their community. To trust Daniel meant risking everything. To reject him meant losing a valuable member during a time when every soul counted. Their faith was their foundation, their rock, and yet, even faith couldn't entirely erase the fear. The organization's promises of power and safety were still fresh in their minds. They remembered the subtle manipulations, the alluring whispers that had almost drawn Daniel into their dark embrace. They had seen firsthand the insidious nature of the temptation, how it eroded resolve, how it could prey on even the strongest faith. Thomas, recognizing the turmoil within the group, raised his hand, his voice now filled with a quiet authority. We have all felt the grip of temptation, each in our own way. We've all fallen short, at times. Daniel's struggle was more visible, more dramatic, but the core issue is one that we all face, the constant battle between our faith and the darkness that surrounds us. He paused, letting his words sink in. Our faith is not about perfection. It is about grace, about forgiveness, about the relentless pursuit of God's love. We are all works in progress, continually being shaped and refined by His grace. His words resonated deeply within the group. They were all flawed, each bearing their own scars of the apocalypse and the internal struggles it had ignited. They were a community of survivors, bound not by flawless virtue, but by their shared faith and their collective pursuit of God's grace. "We can't afford to reject any soul seeking redemption," Martha whispered, her voice laced with conviction. "We must extend the same mercy and grace we seek ourselves." The decision, when it came, was not a unanimous one, but it was a decision born of prayer, deep reflection, and a shared understanding of God's unending love. They would trust Daniel, not because they were blind to his failings, but because their faith taught them the power of forgiveness and redemption. Their journey was far from over. The apocalyptic world still loomed outside their cellar, and the shadowy organization remained a potent threat. But within their small community, a fragile, yet powerful, unity had been reestablished, a unity forged in the crucible of shared experience and the unwavering strength of their faith. The decision made, the weight lifted, albeit slightly, and they knew their journey would continue, strengthened by this newly tested faith. The future remained uncertain, but they faced it together, relying on their faith and the unwavering promise of God's grace. Confronting betrayal. The flickering candlelight danced across Thomas's face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw and the grim set of his mouth. He hadn't spoken much since the events in the upper levels, a silence heavier than the oppressive darkness surrounding them. His usual jovial demeanor, the easy laughter that had once filled their cramped sanctuary, was gone, replaced by a haunted stillness. It was this silence, more than anything else, that fueled the growing unease. Daniel, his gaze unwavering, met Thomas's. He'd expected anger, perhaps accusations, even outright rejection. But this quiet, this withdrawn demeanor was far more unsettling. It spoke of a deeper betrayal, a betrayal that went beyond simple disagreement or fear. "Thomas," Daniel began, his voice low and steady, cutting through the tense silence. "We need to talk. What happened, what you saw, it's affecting us all. We need to understand." Thomas finally looked away, his gaze drifting to the rough-hewn walls of their cellar refuge. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the occasional drip of water from the unseen leaks in the ceiling. It was a silence that mirrored the chasm that seemed to have opened between them, a chasm wider than any physical distance. Sarah, her hand resting gently on her husband, David's, reached out to Thomas. "Thomas, please," she whispered, her voice filled with a compassion that belied her own shaken state. "We need you. We're all hurting, but we need to understand what happened. We can't move forward if we don't." He finally spoke, his voice raspy, barely a breath. I saw him. The one we thought we'd lost, Elijah. He was with them with the shadows. He was helping them, leading them." A collective gasp filled the air. Elijah. The name hung heavy, a dark cloud over their fragile sense of security. Elijah, the young, devout member of their community, the one who had disappeared weeks ago, presumed dead in the chaos of the initial attacks. The thought of Elijah, their friend, working alongside the very people who had caused so much suffering was almost too much to bear. "How can you be sure?" David's voice, usually calm and measured, held a tremor of disbelief. "It's difficult to distinguish friend from foe in this darkness. There is a possibility of mistaken identity." Thomas shook his head, his eyes wide with a mixture of grief and horror. "I saw him, David. I saw the symbol, the mark of the shadows, branded onto his arm. And he spoke of things only he could know, things about our strategy and our sanctuary. They even knew about the hidden passages and tunnels we have here." The revelation was devastating. Their sanctuary, painstakingly built, a place of refuge and worship, had been compromised. The level of betrayal was shocking. It was more than just a misguided individual. It was a systematic infiltration of their community. The trust they had so carefully cultivated, the bonds forged in the fires of adversity, were now shattered beyond repair. "We need proof," Daniel stated, his voice resolute despite the turmoil within him. "We cannot afford to act on accusations alone, especially accusations that could tear apart what little remains of our fellowship." "Proof." Thomas's voice cracked. "He was there, David, I saw him. There was no mistake. I saw Elijah, with my own 2 eyes." His words were punctuated with the painful realization that he had to reconcile what he had witnessed, the deep-seated faith he had in his own vision with the possibility that his mind was playing tricks on him. He looked different, weary and gaunt, but it was him. The silence returned, heavier and more suffocating than before. The weight of doubt pressed down on them, each person grappling with the horrifying implications of Thomas's words. The image of Elijah, once a symbol of youthful faith and unwavering devotion, was now replaced by a chilling vision of treachery and betrayal. The comfort of their shared faith was challenged. The possibility of an enemy within their ranks was a chilling thought, a possibility that threatened to unravel their already fragile unity. "We must pray," Sarah whispered, her voice a trembling plea. "We must seek God's guidance in this dark hour. He will show us the truth." They knelt together, heads bowed in prayer, their voices a chorus of supplication rising into the oppressive darkness of the cellar. The atmosphere of prayer and collective supplication was tangible. It was a shared experience that transcends the confines of their physical world. The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows on the walls, emphasizing their vulnerability, but also highlighting the strength of their faith. The prayer concluded, and still the weight of this possibility was upon them, the doubt and hurt lingering among them, casting long, daunting shadows within their fragile community. The betrayal had shaken them to their core. How could they possibly continue, knowing that one of their own had turned against them? Their faith was tested, not in the face of an external enemy, but by the internal treachery of someone they once held dear. The trust, so carefully constructed in the midst of a ravaged world, was now broken and vulnerable. Daniel, his face etched with worry, addressed the group once more. "We need to investigate this discreetly. We cannot risk further compromise of our sanctuary. We must discern the truth. If Elijah is truly involved, we must understand how far this conspiracy extends. Who else might be implicated?" The task before them was daunting. Trust, the very foundation of their community, had been betrayed. Their immediate safety and long-term survival were now dependent on their ability to untangle the web of deception that had ensnared them. They needed more than their faith. They needed wisdom, courage, and a carefully executed plan to ensure the survival of what remained. The shadows loomed not only outside their sanctuary, but within their hearts as well. The next few days were spent in a tense mixture of prayer, investigation, and agonizing uncertainty. They carefully examined their routines, searching for any discrepancies, any clues that might shed light on the extent of the betrayal. They questioned themselves, searching their own hearts for any signs of weakness, any vulnerability that might have been exploited by the shadows. The process was arduous and emotionally draining, forcing them to confront their own flaws and insecurities. Each one questioned their role in the community, examining their actions, words, and deeds, questioning their motivations, reflecting on how they could have been unknowingly compromised. Their journey was not simply a physical one, it was a spiritual odyssey, demanding self-examination and a deep reckoning with their own human frailties. As they delved deeper into the investigation, subtle hints began to emerge. Minor inconsistencies, overlooked details, and strange occurrences that they had previously dismissed as coincidences. It felt as though a piece of their world, once a solid rock, was now shifting, causing the familiar to feel alien and the secure to feel deeply unstable. A sense of paranoia began to creep into their daily lives, the familiar faces of their fellow believers starting to seem less friendly and more questionable. The uncertainty of their surroundings and the possibility of further betrayals added an extra layer of anxiety in their already stressful circumstances. Through it all, their faith remained their anchor. They prayed constantly, seeking guidance and strength from God. They leaned on each other, offering support and encouragement in the face of overwhelming odds. The challenge was not just to expose the traitor, but to rebuild the trust that had been so grievously broken. The journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but they faced it together, their faith strengthened by this new crucible of trial and tribulation. The promise of God's grace, a beacon in the encroaching darkness, guided their steps. They knew the path ahead would be challenging, but they were determined to tread it together, united in their shared faith and their unwavering commitment to God's plan, whatever it might be. The darkness might threaten to overwhelm them, but the light of their faith, however faint at times, would continue to guide their way.